Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makudir. The time is 8:39 Central African time, and it's time for our hashtag Africa Focus feature. And this time around, we'll be heading over to Sudan, where the humanitarian crisis and catastrophe in that part of the continent is rapidly worsening, with aid agencies warning that more than 40% of the population is now facing acute food insecurity. This is amid the country's brutal civil war, where millions have been displaced and access to basic humanitarian assistance remains severely restricted, and fears of a famine continue to grow in several regions of the country. The conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces has devastated infrastructure, collapsed local economies, and essentially left ordinary civilians trapped in one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. And to help us unpack just the scale of the crisis, the geopolitical dynamics that are at play, and what the international community is or isn't doing in response, we are now joined by geopolitical analyst in the Horn of Africa, Edmond John, who's joining us via our virtual platform. Edmond, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And I think we'll jump right into it. I think the Sudanese war and the humanitarian crisis has been documented for quite some time now. But I don't think the African continent and the world at large seems to truly understand just how deep the devastation is in Sudan. Can you paint a picture for us, the reality on the ground at this current moment in Sudan, and what the people of Sudan are currently battling and facing?
Oh yes, the conflict in Sudan has been going on now, I think, for 3 years or so, and this has had a lot of devastating impacts and effects on the population in terms of displacement. About 9 million are internally displaced, and about 4 million others have fled as refugees into neighboring countries of Uganda and Sudan and partly Ethiopia, and to the north into Egypt. In terms of the humanitarian situation, you find that about 40% of the health facilities, sanitation infrastructure has been destroyed. Um, and then there's just growing food insecurity as a result of continued hostilities that have occasioned the famine, but also blocked access to humanitarian aid. And so about 40% of the population is at risk of hunger. And this becomes one of the world's, if not the world's worst humanitarian disasters currently.
Mm, mm, mm. Can you tell us the latest regarding the RSF and also the Sudanese armed forces here on just how the sheer scale of the violence is seemingly getting out of control, and there isn't no solution at sight. What's the latest regarding how these two entities have been engaging? Are there any talks of peace deals, or ceasefire agreements that are possibly at place and that could be implemented?
Um, any meaningful peace initiative is holding in Sudan. We've had, I think, the very latest being the International Conference on Sudan, which was in Berlin, which was held in Berlin a month or so ago. And this had the backing of the US, European Union, and the African Union. But it didn't go much towards securing a ceasefire, but only resulted in some financial pledges, I think, to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Sudan. But by and large, there have only been, high-level international efforts, but just calling for ceasefires, but lacking mechanisms of bringing both sides on the table and having a ceasefire agreement, arrived at. We've also seen the African Union and the United Nations working together to sort of revitalize inter-Sudanese dialogue that can lead to a long-lasting solution, and this would mean involving civilians in the peace process as opposed to the initial efforts that largely is centered on the warring parties. But so
Mm,
far, both sides have not been able to sit on the table and discuss, the future of Sudan and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And as either side makes any military gains on the ground, it's incentivized to pursue military policy even more. And this is also because there's not been heavy international pressure to
mm.
disincentivize violence in Sudan.
And one thing that's really, really concerning, and this is something that aid agencies have also repeatedly warned about, restricted humanitarian access corridors, where humanitarian aid can reach Sudanese people. How much is the ongoing fighting preventing such corridors from being opened, where people can reach food and medical assistance? And is this deliberately done, where those channels that could be, lifelines essentially for thousands and thousands of people, are cut off to make sure that people essentially die of famine and not having access to medical care?
Um, uh, I think what we've seen is, weaponization of access to aid, or weaponization of hunger in
Mm,
Sudan, whereby I think 20% of truck traffic, have been able to make through. So that means about 80% of the truck traffic bringing in aid has not been able to access conflict track populations. And this is deliberate by the fighting forces on either side, but mostly reportedly on the territories under the control of Rapid Support Forces, RSF.
No, most definitely, brother Edmond. I think we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us, and for painting that very, very concerning picture about Sudan. It is definitely a story that deserves a lot more attention than it's currently getting, and hope we chat again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
There we go. And with that, we've come to the end of our hashtag Africa Focus feature. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.